cool, interesting little bit in your OCP that could be used, for sure. So in summary, before we take some questions, we talked about what sea level rise is, the how and the why, and what are the impacts of it, and how to address it. We talked about 4 different approaches: protect, accommodate, retreat, and avoid. And we did an overview of possible strategies to help mitigate, to help adapt for sea level rise impacts. We will be doing, after the question period and the break, 3 interactive mapping exercises. We'll do one that has to do with, and I will repeat that just for you to get to know what we're going to do after the break. But the first one is coastal assets. So on a map, I'm going to ask half of the room to do the mapping of all the coastal assets of the community, including beaches, schools or infrastructure by the coast, anything that you feel that is very important to the community and needs to be looked at. And there'll be, for you, a list. Every time you put a little red dot, you'll say this dot specific is this place. So that's one half of the room will do that. The other half will do a ranking of sea level rise impacts on your island. So erosion, where does it happen? Flooding, saltwater intrusion, if there is. So just for you to put it on a map and see where it is. It's a visual aid for the community to keep after we've done that. So we can certainly digitize that afterwards. So you'll have a copy and you can, it's a first step. After that, we're going to switch teams. So the first team that did the assets will go to the erosion part. So to make sure that what is on the map is good. Are we thinking of something else? What should be on this map? And the other team will go to the assets. If you feel so inclined, we can certainly start ranking the assets. Say, this is very important for the community to address when to start to address, because I mean 2050 is 31 years from now. So, and I mean that's a projection, right? Those projections might change as the time goes, because we are figuring out that impacts are happening faster than predicted. So, and then there will be a stakeholder mapping exercise if we have time. I think we will. So what is that? Is that naming organizations, individual businesses that need to be sitting at a table for the next talk. When we start planning, who should be sitting at a table? Who should we engage in the community to make sure that all the voices are heard? So that's the third exercise. And that should bring us to about 12:30. So let's do a question period. And since I'm not a scientist, if I don't know the answer, I will make sure I'll find it for you. But I know there's a couple of people, so I want this. It's for you to see what is in the room and who is in the room. If anybody knows the answer, please jump in at any time. Any questions? Hi.
When you're saying horizontal setback, you're
Yeah.
meaning go up like this and horizontal that way, or are you meaning horizontal limb line?
Horizontal like that.
Yeah.
So you have to take into consideration the slopes as well. So a non-slope area would be flooded if it says 0.5 meter by 2050. If somebody lives 5 kilometers from the coast, they will maybe be impacted, even though they're 5 kilometers from if it's a flat land. If it's a slope, then you have a little more chance to be a little more resilient a little longer. But that's what it means. Because you seem to be not sure what I said.
Okay, so somebody that's living on a slope,
Yeah,
and you want them to be 30 meters back from the water, or 15,
Right.
then you go measure up and then 15 meters straight into that
So
way.
measuring up is vertical allowance,
Yeah,
which
but and then you go 15 meters in from high water mark vertically, horizontally up,
Yeah.
you've gone vertically. How do you actually, on a piece of paper,
well, you need to have
calculate that?
professional, somebody coming to say, okay, this is 30 meter from the natural boundary. There's some guidelines, the government, the guideline says with the future estimated natural boundary. So where will the natural boundary at 2100 will be? And from that, you measure 30 meters. But you need a professional to do that, right? So if it's the flood level is 1.5, so from that, 1.5 and 30 meters in
so the way we're
from the
doing it?
natural boundary. But the 1.5 flood construction level is not in your, as it stands, it's not in the DPA or the OCP. It's not some, it's just a vertical allowance, if I'm not mistaken, Emma. Is that correct? Or horizontal, you don't have a vertical one. But if somebody would be a professional to say, okay, 30 meters, if you're on a slope, it brings you here. Obviously, you need somebody to do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I like the idea that we need to prepare for 2050, but what it hits me strongest is the picture and undercurrent of the Queen of Capilano on December 20th, when the southeasterly put water up to the captain's height.
Yep.
And that storm happened at a time when it wasn't a king tide, it was short by 2 feet of a king tide.
Right.
So the immediate concern that I have is that a king tide plus that storm is going to be worse than the results we got in December. So this isn't a long-term, this is a short-term problem that I think impacts this island.
As I said, those are projections by the government to work with. So how the communities around in BC, the coastal communities, can address that. Obviously, each and every community may be different and something to talk about. Absolutely. Judy?
We've been basing the setback on the natural boundary, which is the natural high water mark is defined.
Right.
Which is what surveyors use, but you're talking about the estimated, the future estimated boundary. So how are surveyors?
For the projection of 2050, they base the 30 meters on the new estimated natural boundary.
So how do they figure
So,
that
I
out?
mean,
So
are
they-
they
you need
now
a
doing
professional
that?
to assess that.
Has the legislation changed, or is this something?
Those are guidelines, it's not regulated, but those are guidelines for people to say, okay, this is with the rise of sea level by 2050 and by 2100, these are things you should be considering.
And where are
It's
those?
not regulated.
Where are those guidelines found?
The government, BC government. It's called the flood hazard. The big title is flood hazard.
Well, we can, you can find them for us when we're off doing that.
Yes, I thought I would find it really quickly, but as it stands, sometimes when you look at things. Any other question? But yeah, it's available. The guidelines are available and online from the BC government website. Yes, sir.
As you know, I'm the marina operator owner, and I'm more concerned about this than anyone because I have such a large investment. But I question or don't understand some of your information.
Okay.
We, as marina operators and shoreline operators, work from the datum line. The datum line is where all charts, everything is measured from and has been measured from for the last 100 years.
Right.
And it has literally not changed. In the last 117 years, it went from, and I use feet because the chart was in feet, it's an old one, 8.083 feet to last year's, it was 7.89 feet. That's a difference of 1/64th of an inch. In other words, and it's dropped, not risen.
Right.
Whenever you talk about, and I don't see any mention of your datum in here except on page 12, you use the Canadian Geodatum, which I'm referring to, and then add all of the stuff on top. You talk about the ice freeze and the ice caps. Well, when ice freezes, just like it breaks your pipes if they freeze in the house in the winter, it expands 10% to do that. So that all of these glaciers and the ice caps that are floating out there are roughly 90% underwater. And if they melt, I'm not talking about on land glaciers, if they melt, they've lost 10% or 9% of their volume. So they're not adding or taking away from the water at all.
Nope.
Now then, the glaciers up in the mountains, yeah, as they melt, they'll add to it. But there is no negligible, to date, in the last 100 years, of change in the data. How are you interpreting this different?
Right. So, obviously, those are guidelines and projections. Some places have risen, some places have sunk. The coastline, I mean, Tofino is an example of that. When you refer to the ice, so the ice melting in the water doesn't affect sea level rise at all, not a bit. It's the glacier, as I mentioned in the video, that will impact that. But the most important thing is the thermal expansion.
Excuse me, glaciers on the land you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, land glaciers. Is that what I said? Sorry. The most important thing is thermal expansion. So when temperature rises, sea level rise because of that. So that's what they are saying. This is the most important of the two.
But it hasn't done it in 117 years.
It hasn't done it here. It has done it other places. So it's very different from one place to another because of the land and the topography, the soil compaction.
I'm talking about the west coast of Canada. It hasn't changed.
It has in some places. The rate in BC right now is 3.2 millimeter a year. It has doubled in the last 2 decades in some places, but that's the average on the BC coast. Whether or not this will continue, that's what I'm saying, that all those extreme events and climate change impacts may have a domino effect quicker than what is projected. When they look at the numbers, they see that it's changing more rapidly than they expected it to be. Anybody wants to add to this, perhaps?
I think the other thing to be clear about is almost all of the ice and glaciers is on land. And the glaciers, if you look at Greenland, you look at Antarctica, all of those are big hunks of ice.
They might be. I can't
Yeah,
argue
well,
that.
do your geography.
I
Anyway,
was
yep.
told us 90% of the ice caps are floating.
I would love to see your source.
Well, this is not to forget that anyway, in making a community a little more resilient, whether or not these numbers happen in 5 years or 100 years, anything that you would do and take in consideration living shorelines techniques will increase the resiliency of the coast and will have a positive effect. Whether or not the sea rises at a faster pace than we expect, it's just good sense to think, is there places on our islands that may be affected? And how can we do that in the most environmentally friendly way, if that's what you want to do? And I know it is in the OCP and DPA, so I'm saying, I've had people saying, you know, climate change doesn't exist and all that, but to me, if you make your coast more resilient, it has no negative impact. You're creating a place where it's resilient, the ecosystem works well, and you have all the benefits of that. So, this lady had.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. One is that we're on a seismically very active
Right.
coastline, and probably what Rondi's talking about is impacted by whether we're sliding under or over
Right.
the other play would have an impact on whether we're going up or down.
Good
But
point.
the other thing is that aside from just the glacial thing, which seems a really long ways away for us, really strong storms and this combination of high tides and storm surges is happening for us. And so maybe we need to dig a little deeper and find out at Bowen which things actually are impacting us more and plan for that rather than planning for really broad picture that might not apply.
But anything you would do to address this impact as sea level rise impact as well. So it's all positive, right? And for you to sit and say, okay, is there things we need to do, and how can we do it in a way that is economically and environmentally feasible for us? Any other questions?
Yeah, just to make a point, which has been said here, this is just one component, sea level rise is just one component of it. I think the veracity of these storms that we've been witnessing have been like never before. We're canceling ferries because of the winds and that sort of thing. So that has to be a component.
Right.
Also, the super arid summers we're having and destroying all the root structures, a lot of trees are coming down, but these are all have to be components of shoreline protection.
Exactly.
So
And how
that,
to-
I just wonder if it's taken into consideration as far as the planning and all that thing is concerned. And all
Well, that would be a good point for you to say, okay, these are the impacts. I mean, if you say trees are falling, is there a way to create water resistant trees? Permaculture is a good thing to think about. How do you plant trees that can be withstanding erosion and all that?
Yeah.
To me, those are a good thing for the community to talk about. For me, is just say, hey, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
I'm turning the table on you and say, hey, what are you wanting to do about this? In the way that works for the community. I'm not giving you anything to do. I'm just saying, this is the point of departure. Where are we going with that? And how can we make this an interesting, engaging way to, because as you see, the community is full of interesting and intelligent people. So let's dig into that and see what people have like ideas. There's great things happening in Boston. In Boston, they were going to do, I mean, it's big cities, I understand that, more money and all that, but I'm just giving you an idea that when you're creative, things can have a positive impact. Boston, they were supposed to do seawalls, and they realized that it's going to cost them more money, it's hard to maintain, it's not cost effective, and they decided to do something that a waterfront is more resilient to water, but in a beautiful way, and it costs less money. New York did the same thing with oyster. They want to become they used to be the oyster capital. Now they planted in collaboration with local business, getting oyster shells, seeding them, dropping them in big, huge cage to create a wave.
An artificial reef.
Right, exactly. And they've done that in the bay, and what's happening is that oysters are filtering the water, animals are coming back, they're like, wow, this is working, they've got the kids engaged. It's just so, to me, that gets me going, because those projects are positive. Last one I mentioned is Oh, I did mention that, the Halifax Bay, where they dropped 390 little reef balls, and just, it's a great project as well. And maybe it's not as expensive as one thing, so. Any other questions? Should we take a break?
Well, I think when you talk about the horizontal effect of the water,
Yep.
I think what happened in Mozambique, where everything is at water level, I mean, the whole country was at water level. So,
What are they going to do?
no, but they have suffered
Yeah,
of the fact of that storm coming in.
Yep.
Because the whole country is at 1 to 2 meter water level,
Right.
sea level.
well, a good example of that is the Netherlands, right? They've lived, the Netherlands have more,
Right.
so, sorry, sometimes my brain, I haven't slept much, I haven't slept yet. But a lot more technology and way of thinking about water, because that's what they've lived with, and that's what they're fighting, and they have great water breaks, one of which is in Rotterdam, which is massive, and obviously costs a lot of money, but they've also done beach nourishment, that is like taking sand from out in the water to replenish the beach, and that has created an ecosystem for animals to come back to and beach goers to go to. So there's a lot of things happening, and you know, sometimes when you dig, you're like, maybe we cannot do that, but is there ways for us to do something that could be as positive as that? Yes, sir.
Yes, there was something interesting 2 days ago on the CBC. They were showing the flooding in Mozambique, and just before that, there was a little archival document of what had happened in 1948 in the Fraser Valley. The 2 pictures could have been put on the top of each other. They were matching one another. We just have to realize that in 1948, all the lower mainland got flooded
Yes.
in an incredible way.
Yep.
They are dikes with the work, and they are not improved on that system, thinking that it will never happen again. It was mentioned it was the flooding of the century. It could very well happen before the century is over, and the disaster now would be 100 times more
Right.
than what had happened in 1948.
Yes.
So the question of creating something, thinking of a possibility to happen, is very much like insuring oneself against the fire for one's house. You create some insurance that it will not happen.
Right.
You don't do it once it has happened.
Exactly, because then that's going to cost you a lot of money.
Exactly.
Anything that you try to mitigate after the fact, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So is there ways to maybe not, because I know small communities and funding might be, but is there ways to collaborate with other islands? That I'm not too sure, but I'm sure there can be a creative way to get the ball rolling. I think the first thing to do is to engage more people and give more workshops, one of which could be the Living Shorelines workshop, which gives you hands-on ways of dealing with waterfront properties problem. Emma. Hi.
I just wanted to pipe in from the planning perspective.
Yes,
This
please.
is definitely a hot topic for planners and planning for the future. I know the capital region has done a lot of work planning for sea level rise, so we're not reinventing the wheel. There is a lot of lessons to be learned, best practices that we draw from. I know the North Shore municipalities, North City and District and District of West Vancouver, are collaborating right now
Yep.
to do a flood management plan. And I have been talking with the planners, and at the very beginning, if Bowen Island were to participate, we would have to contribute at least $10,000. So it is a huge cost to undertake these type of studies, especially the coastal engineering cost. And that's to get an accurate picture of the impacts. But there are other things we could do if we didn't want to get down to the meter of exactly what's going to be affected.
Right.
We can still look at other mitigation and adaptation measures. But just to let you know, there are things out there with a range of prices, price tag attached, for everyone
there's a list. If anybody wants to put the email address, there's a large document I worked on, and in that document there's biotechnical measures, as I mentioned during the presentation, which is basic engineering mixed with plant technology. So very interesting and cost effective for people living by the coast, absolutely. So there's a long list of that in the document, but anybody who wants to have any resource that is on this table, I will send all of that to you, absolutely. So why don't we take, oh, this lady has another question.
So what map are we going to be using? Are we going to be using the maps developed by the province for the coastal floodplain mapping, where they've already identified the areas where they think are at risk? Or are we going to be
No.
using Fraser Basin Council developed maps, or
The Islands Trust mapping, so you.
where they've actually shown the areas at risk?
No, it's, what it does on those maps is all the shorelines, specific types. So this part here is rocky, this part is mud flats. So on that map, you will have that. So it gives you an idea of
But it hasn't been correlated to the
no,
maps.
because there's no any of that hasn't been done very, very well, topographic detail mapping of all that, so it could be, nobody has done it. I think it dates from 1970s, all those maps with all the topographic
All the crew
maps.
and Lyle work that was done in the 2000s?
For the Fraser Valley, was it?
No, it's for the whole province, the whole coast.
Yeah.
Sue Ellen, don't we have proper GIS maps of Owen Island with elevation, and I think that was.
We do have that kind of info, but I think the idea of looking at what is rock and what is mud and what is sand is really useful for thinking about risk of especially coastal erosion and sea level rise. I know there are, Allison is correct, there are more detailed maps using the high technology stuff. In fact, we've got some new LiDAR maps that get it down even tighter, and that's coming this year.
Yeah, because it's not done yet, right? It's not done yet.
No, it's not done yet, and but all those resources are adding. I think the point is we're going to look at substrate as opposed to
Right.
elevation in the next part of the workshop.
Right.
There's more that can be done.
Right, it's 11. Oh, is there another question? Somebody was.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say we do have 2013 contours.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we take a break? There's coffee and it's good, big goods. We'll take about 15 to 20-minute breaks. I'm gonna set with Gillian tables with maps, and I will repeat what I'm expecting people to do after. But please enjoy yourself, take a break, have a coffee, and thank you very much.
That's right. Well, it hasn't changed, but those are pretty good. 1920 or something like that.
The one is all floating on
Oh, good, I was going to ask you.
How's Judy?
It's all based on the data.
I am well.
That changed
Very
like
well.
water.
Very well indeed.
Is this, can I was wondering if this was specific to both.
I didn't think this was a mayor's occasion or something, but I guess every occasion's a mayor's.
Every occasion is a mayor's occasion.
So I was wondering,
Point at it.
Got a few citizens.
You know, I don't know three beds. But there's also
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it's not too
Well, we'll see,
public,
but it
right?
still
It's just
doesn't get a
give you,
thermal expansion.
It doesn't cover the fact that the glaciers are all the more. Rodney, can I have that?
No, thank you, I just checked to make sure you were, I thought you must have been looking at the Point Atkinson.
That's what we do, and that's what the city of Vancouver does. They use the same data. That's everything is based on the data plane. Charts,
I know, I was just making sure you were looking at the same, measurement place.
Observation as well.
Point Atkinson.
Everybody knows where it's
Okay, that's good. I think we'll shoot out to the glacier, because I know the Lionsgate Bridge is actually getting steeper because the land on both sides is
it isn't the ocean that's rising, it's the sinking. Well, the ocean hasn't risen according to the data.
Is the data relative just to the land? Anyway, that's what I mean. There was a fellow doing some research who presented over at the West End Library a couple of years ago. He was looking at shellfish, mussels, and so because he was studying mussels, they had to be really careful about sea level rise and the impact, or sorry, earth dumping out of the water. So they discovered just their study area, which is out of southern Maine. Some parts were going up and some parts were going down, depending on whether there were seismic influences, glacial influences, or all that stuff.
All these people in the same room, what they would do, ultimately, a good map would have been good. I mean, this was provided by Island Trust, they're working with different, they have developed different layers on the map. But sea level rise, they could have put the 0.5 meter and the 1 meter on the map, but it didn't give me the elevation, so it's not going to get in. And those maps, I didn't know how to work them to get those maps. Yeah. So, I understand. No, I understand that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I thought it was because we.
Well, I'd like to say after chat, we don't really have.
Yeah, exactly. But some of it, I think you're
Those cement slabs. They were, wow.
and it's some use, I think it's fair. Okay, somebody was saying that there was something,
And they've got a way close to.
I thought there was some talking.
People use it.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not only about zero, but it's about.
So she was saying that it's used for transportation of goods.
That's the issue. In the history of
Well, we are first country
Right.
Very dog, their wing walls, not the wing, they're all, when they redid the. Do you want to move it back? Rail gases, which have the it floats. Yes,
She took a picture, not only of the
that with Alice. You need to move. Where do you want to go? This way?
Just slightly over so there's a bit of space between the two.
Do you want?
What? I'd love to talk to you.
So why don't we, if you're gonna carry on a,
Do you want chairs around here, or what's
No,
the setup?
we're just
Okay.
if they want to translate, they just got one, but
oh, big friend, he's a, they're, oh, a very good friend. Oh, there's, sorry, what's the last name?
How can you forget? That's Bob Baker. Yes, yes, there was some aristocracy in his background.
I get a phone number sometime.
Well,
I won't bother. No, just in case there's something. In case there's something as a neighbor that I need, that, you know.
so my home number is 2335.
But, you know, I get a real problem with voice messages. Rather than you, I thought you'd be the better one.
That's my cell.
Yeah, and that way you can text me or whatever, and that just doesn't go away. For an emergency, Gary.
No,
Trish is the one I know.
and I'm sorry, but I don't,
but